Hi, Greg. This is April 12th, 2022. How you doing, Greg?
Well, there's been better weeks. I mean, darn it, we got our computer stolen, and they're stealing our crap off the computers, and it's been a rough week. And then, yeah, maybe we shouldn't say too much about that, but yeah, they're really coming after your heart
Oh,
because they
you mean
know
the
the story
post
you're
office?
telling.
The post office stole the computer with my book on it,
Yeah, yeah. So
and
they
we
took
we
that. They
know
took
it.
any
We know it was
passwords,
stolen because it showed up at my house with the correct name and address, and then it disappeared right at my house
right?
as we tracked it here.
And then the post office says they still have it on my end.
And then they've stolen our passwords, and somebody just tried to take all the money out of my bank account. And somebody broke into my Facebook account and removed my Facebook account via Facebook. So I can't get
Right.
my,
And it's not like we had the password setting on there or anything. This had to be intelligent people that could get stuff that's been deleted off of a hard drive and bring it back. These are people that really know what they're doing.
yeah, they went through the hard drive and stole the book and stole our passwords. And
Right.
gee, it's real nice. And this is how badly the US government doesn't want my story and truth of the American history told. It's just unbelievable. Not only do they murder people daily, but they steal my bank account for 69 years, murder my wives, my children, and now they're stealing the book that you wrote for me.
And you've had that Facebook account with no problems for at least 12 years, right?
Yeah, it was a history of the country. It was the real history of the country that the US government hides by murdering people. And you know that, and anybody that watches me knows that. I'm
Right.
gonna start a screen share and we'll talk about the Manning Ranch. And the first picture I'll show will be the Manning Civil War Ranch. So I'm gonna start that screen share now. And there, you and me are on the right. And I'm putting us on the left. And this was the Manning Civil War Ranch. Correct?
Right. Now, tell us why you call it the Manning Ranch. It's not like it has a big sign that says this is the Manning
Well,
Ranch.
Mr. Manning in Carolina owns it. And Carolina is Graham's state. Senator Graham. Senator Graham, the Graham family owns all the media in Detroit, where I was related. I was born in 53. And in 57, when my family member, Admiral Byrd, was murdered, my mother was his nurse. She told me he was murdered. And the official US claim is that he had a heart attack. And my mother never believed that. And she told me all my life that our family member was murdered. On the day he was murdered, my father's hands were cut off at Twin Pines by Mr. Pratt and a Mr. Behringer. And I and my twin were kidnapped. And I and my twin were kidnapped and chained to a post on a toilet in a governor's basement. And then 5 men proceeded to torture, beat us, and sexually abuse us at the age of 4. They beat my twin to death, attempting to get him to give them sex. And
I'm
then,
fascinated that this was Osborne's basement. The former Governor Osborne of Michigan owned that house apparently at some point, is what I'm gathering. And now your twin was killed and dumped in a field in Pennsylvania. And now you have Dr. Oz running for Senate in Pennsylvania as Merrick Garland, like Judy Garland, is now our Attorney General.
and before that, Barr, my neighbor, was Attorney General, and Roseanne Barr and Kathy O'Brien pretended they were me, and that Hollywood was using them as they ran a radio station and a TV station for Senator Graham. in 1957. And I stopped the illegal gun and drug trade being run by the CIA and senators in Michigan in 1979, 1980. And then the US government proceeded to put me in jail for stopping an illegal drug and gun trade. I was put in jail for almost a year. And my children were kidnapped. And then they started murdering my wives. And since that time, I've had 4 wives murdered. And the police and the bikers and the government and the news media that murders my wives and attorneys and judges, they cover it all up. Not a mention of any of these unsolved murders. And there's dozens and dozens of them. I've had kids killed and thrown on my properties since 1957. And
Now,
some of them are the children of presidents, and it's all covered up in the media.
Right.
So this was the Manning Ranch, and it was offered to me when the woman that created the Head Start program for President Ronald Reagan, Terry Heath, and Sarah Heath Palin was running with John McCain to be president against Clinton and Obama at the time. Terry Heath was kidnapped out of her CPS and Head Start office by 2 off-duty policemen in Menominee, Wisconsin. And the family, the kids she was protecting were being abused and used by the porno industry on the Great Lakes. And that was the same porno industry that kidnapped me and my twin in 1957 and was being run by the families of 5 US governors. And we've mentioned those before, but someone has now absconded with my Facebook account in which we mentioned all these people. So real quick, I'll say it was Wallace, Anderson, Andrews, Osborne, Huey P. Long's family, and others. And all of these men and women in my public school system, Long was the principal at my public school in kindergarten. Wallace was my kindergarten teacher. Anderson was supposedly a friend of my father, and Osborne was a neighbor in Oakland County, Michigan. And all of these are families of US governors. And all of them were adults other than Hall and one of the Osborne family members who were approximately 12 years older than me at the time. I was 4, they were 15, 16. The other adults were adults in their 30s and 40s. I was kidnapped right out of my elementary school by my kindergarten teacher, Miss Wallace, and my principal, Miss Long, and handed to the men who tortured and raped I and my twin. And this brings us to the Manning Ranch. Terry Heath created the Head Start program for children for President Ronald Reagan. President Ronald Reagan held Terry Heath up as his role model for Head Start after she helped create the program back in the 60s. And Terry knew me. And Terry was a very educated woman from California. And she had moved to Wisconsin after marrying the only living Civil War soldier on earth and having a son. And that son, his name was Jason. And Jason was killed in a car she bought him for his graduation 5 minutes after he sat in it. And then her mother died. So she had nobody to turn to but me. And she called me from Iowa and said 2 off-duty policemen have kidnapped me after trashing my CPS office, where I was protecting little kids from a pedophile industry operating on the Great Lakes. Now, when I was 4, I lived in Michigan on the Great Lakes in Oakland County. My grandfather had a home on the Great Lakes next to Selfridge Air Force Base, and they would try to fly me in planes and sell me as a sex slave in gay bars in California back then. And this is 1957. Terry knew of these things, and Terry ran CPS and Head Start in Menominee, Wisconsin, and she was protecting on the other side of the Great Lakes a little boy and a little girl, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, who were being used in the same pedo industry via Van Nuys, California. And they were trying to fly those little kids off the Great Lakes. As she did that and exposed that to the police, her office was trashed, and she was kidnapped by 2 off-duty police in Menominee, Wisconsin. They drove her illegally across 5 state lines. She escaped them in Iowa, called me on the phone, and her exact words to me was, "Hugh, you're the only guy on earth I trust. I've been kidnapped by 2 off-duty policemen. Help me." I told her I'd fly to Menominee. I told her to get back to Wisconsin. And I then proceeded to find a place for her to live in Tennessee, where I lived. And while I was looking for a place to live, I came across this property picture. And it's a Civil War ranch from the Battle of Blue Springs. It's 30 acres. It's in Losheim, Tennessee, next to Walmart distribution in Midway, Tennessee. It's on Snake Road and Grassy Creek Road. And I was shown this property by an Italian man who introduced me to a go-between named Woody, between Woody, the caretaker of this place, and Mr. Manning, who owned it. And Mr. Manning lived in Carolina, where Senator Graham lived. And Senator Graham had already covered up my kidnap and the governors who tortured me and raped and killed kids in Michigan since 1957. Now, I purchased this ranch here in 2002, 2 months after 9/11 happened. And you can talk about 9/11. Why is that important in my life, Greg?
Well, from everything I'm learning from you, that's the Twin Towers is where they kept the trademarks for ASCAP. Is that right? Am I following that correctly?
No, my receipts for worldwide royalties. At bottom line, I was an ASCAP
right.
BMI publisher. We're in the Twin Towers.
Right. So you would have had your licenses there, right? Okay.
Now, my licenses came from Foley Federal Court.
Okay. So I'm seeing now. Licenses came from Foley Federal Court, and the receipts were in the Twin Towers
in New York. The receipts,
right.
The receipts for my business and worldwide trade were in the Twin Towers.
Okay, right.
My civil rights case was in Building 7 and in the Pentagon.
Right. Yeah, right. Which explains why the building that was never hit by a plane had to come down too, and why there was no footage of an airplane ever hitting the Pentagon.
My civil rights case against the family that built the Pentagon, the Groves family, was in the Pentagon when that office building was destroyed. I still have my copy of that civil rights case, but right. It never went to court because all the records in the Pentagon were destroyed.
Right.
And my attorney was murdered, and a Judge Hunter D. Stair, had been murdered a few years earlier at Selfridge Air National Guard. And Dick Cheney had recalled the Selfridge Air National Guard as they murdered Judge Hunter D. Stair, who was working a case with me at that time. And
They found them at Selfridge, didn't they?
outside of Selfridge, and they said he drank himself to death, and that's not a true story. At the
Right.
same time, they kidnapped my daughter, and I had taken her to a psychiatrist for help after I recovered her from her kidnapping. And that psychiatrist was murdered 5 minutes after I and my daughter left his office. And
That's how you know that Stair was murdered. Yeah. Mhm.
neither of those were murders or drinking themselves to death. Both men were talking right to me 5 minutes before they were murdered.
Right.
And Sheriff Hackle and in Macomb County covered that up. And in Oakland County, L. Brooks Patterson had been covering up my kidnap all the way back to 1957 with the Barr family and the Graham family.
And then even after 9/11, you had down there in Tennessee near your ranch house there, we were just showing that another attorney was murdered also as he was going to file charges on his way to the courthouse.
Yeah, now this is the Civil War ranch where I moved Terry from Menominee, Wisconsin, the bull there.
Yeah.
On the same ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to show a few pictures of this. And this was my wife, Victoria, who was murdered on that ranch 7 years later.
That was in 2011.
This is
October
the
30th.
same ranch. Now, this ranch was 30 square acres. Wasn't a small ranch. And this was Terry Heath. Can you see that picture of Terry Heath?
Yes.
This is my fiance who was murdered on my birthday, July 4th. Her name's Terry Heath. And she ran the CPS Head Start office, and she actually created the Head Start program for President Reagan. I found her hanging on in a leash, her dog's leash, after she told me two men were stalking her. Approximately 6 months after I moved her from Menominee, Wisconsin, onto this Civil War farm owned by Manning. Now, Manning is real important because Manning and my alumni in Warren, where I was a teacher, I taught science and electronics, and Garrison taught history. Garrison and Manning co-created the JFK archives. And
Right.
I was set up on this Civil War ranch in Mossheim, Tennessee, so they could murder Terry and then murder my next wife, Victoria. And here's Terry with her son. That's her son, Jason. And there's her daughter, Dana. And you know, Fox News gave you Dana as a reporter.
Right.
Terry's murder and her son Jason's murder, and Jason's father was the only living Civil War soldier on earth. His name was Bookie, but they even hide that in media. And they write other things in Wikipedia anytime they want. But you can see Jason and his mother and his sister. And this is just before Terry called me and told me two off-duty policemen kidnapped her out of her trashed Head Start and CPS office on the Great Lakes in Menominee. And then here's another picture of that same farm. And you can see we had cattle in the back. We had chickens and cattle. And I had started a garden. And Terry had everything she needed there to live. And there's another cow. That was Terry and Victoria's favorite cow. And when Terry died, that cow followed me around all day. And when Victoria died, that cow followed me around all day. That cow knew they'd been murdered. My wife, Victoria, never touched that cow. She was in a wheelchair with muscular dystrophy, never went outside of the house. And she was murdered Halloween Eve, 2011, on that same ranch.
Right.
And there's a real big history to all of this. Now, as you can see here, there's tobacco plants and tomato plants. And I had a big garden here on this ranch as my wives were murdered on it. And you can see it's secluded. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away.
You even found some Civil War artifacts on that property, I believe.
A Gatling gun and bullets, yes. When I put this garden in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had a caretaker, Glenn Tweed. He would come cut the lawn for me.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I'm coughing, but you see, this is in a secluded area of Tennessee. So it would be real easy for somebody to come up, grab Terry or Victoria and murder them. And both women told me that they were being stalked before they were murdered. And I found both women murdered. And my mother was a nurse, and I've had some nurses training. I gave them both CPR, and I flew them alive to hospitals. And both women were murdered a second time, 35 days later.
Right.
Carrie was murdered on my birthday. Victoria, was dismembered, sodomized, her ears cut off, and her throat slit Halloween Eve, 2011. As the killer called me on Miss Walter's phone, right from my wife's bedside, as they dismembered her 100 miles away. And at that point, I called Victoria's security guards, who were retired state policemen from Carolina once again. Now remember, I'm in Tennessee. My wives were in Tennessee hospitals, but they put state police from Carolina in charge of their security. And that state policeman, when I called him, as the killer called me on the advocate's phone from the Tennessee hospital, he turned a blind eye to my wife's murder. And on the day they murdered my wife, they also murdered the attorney I hired to file murder charges the next day. And his name was James Bauman.
Yeah.
So the DA never got a murder report. And the police in two cities, in Greenville, Tennessee and Johnson City, Tennessee, and then the state police from South Carolina, never opened a murder report. They said that a sodomized, dismembered, slit throat on my wife, as the killer called me on her advocate's phone from the hospital, they wrote natural causes on the death certificate, and there was not even an obituary for Victoria Mellon.
Yeah, because that was run by the local paper, and then the man
And-
of the
and I
guy
had
in
called,
charge was.
prior to that, I had called police to this ranch. In the days before Victoria was murdered, my house had somebody fired a gun into my back porch, blew a hole in the patio window, while Vicky was standing or not standing, seated in her wheelchair at that window. And then someone was running a shovel around the brick on that home. And you can see this is a brick home.
Like scraping the shovel up against it, right?
It rang. Yeah, the shovel would ring up, and he was running it. Victoria, can you see my mouse circling here?
Yeah.
Well, Victoria slept there, and somebody at 2 and 3 in the morning was running a shovel back and forth along this edge here around her bedroom. just before she was murdered. I called the police out to the house. When the police showed up, they tried to tell me that it was this gutter being blown by the wind. And they used fake names and badge numbers on half a dozen reports. Fake names and fake badge numbers being called out to my house because somebody's threatening my wife. I can't say the word, burglarizing my home at 3 a.m, 2 and 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And the people doing it were bikers from a bike club they built down the street at the end of my road, half a mile away.
Yeah, that they just made
And then
after you moved there.
the police used fake names and fake badge numbers. I had a stack of reports like this of break-ins and reports about a shovel being run on the brick, and a shovel is steel and it rings. There's no mistaking it. A gutter is aluminum and it doesn't ring.
Right.
And they
Big
kept
difference.
trying to tell me it was the aluminum gutter when it was a shovel being raked across the brick. I know the difference.
Right.
And then why would they use fake names and badge numbers? When Victoria was murdered, it came to my attention that all the police on the break-in records, my front door and I had 5 doors in this house, and every one of them was broken into. In every police report I had, there was a fake name and a fake badge number. So the police covered up whoever was breaking into my home and who murdered my wife. Just like the 2 off-duty policemen kidnapped Terry, trashed her office. She escaped him and called me for help. And then I was given this ranch for next to nothing by Woody, and it was owned by Manning. And at the same time, we had Tom Garrett. I supported Victoria in this house after Terry's murder because Victoria had muscular dystrophy. And I would support her with this electronic, see Squire Electric Sales and Service. And that was my phone number, and that's me. And see, I was hiring people. I was hiring people from places like NASA to help me at my electric motor, computer, and home appliance repair and sales right out of this home. And there's the Greenville Sun, and Alex Jones owned the Greenville Sun. And both of my murdered wives didn't even get an obituary in the Greenville Sun.
Right.
And Alex Jones, the owner, had been my neighbor on Lynn Avenue in Greenville, Tennessee. He knew me, and all his reporters knew me. So you can see here I am, Squire Electric Sales and Service. And here I am hiring people.
Now, would you say that's why Alex Jones from InfoWars was
And then
created?
look at this. This is real interesting, Rick.
Okay.
You now have Kamala Harris pretending she's my Harris family, and she's not.
Right.
And you have the Dalai Lama begins 16-day US tour in San Francisco. Completely BS story. Above my ads, and I would rent half pages to hire people and to sell computers to support Vicky in a wheelchair with muscular dystrophy. And now you have Kamala Harris, and she's Indonesian. And you see how far back this was planned. This is 2011, right?
She's from India, not Indonesia.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what's the difference?
Yeah.
India, Dalai Lama, and
right.
My wife's murder was when Obama was president with Clinton.
Yeah.
And Terry Heath was murdered Obama and Clinton on my birthday. Victoria murdered Halloween. And then Alex Jones put in the paper about the Dalai Lama, above ads I paid for. This was filler news stories. You understand this?
Sure.
So they had already planned on installing Kamala Harris back in 2011 when they murdered Terry Heath. And Sarah Heath Palin was running against Obama and Clinton. And my wife, Victoria.
Right.
Excuse me. And here's my wife, Victoria. And you can see I married her on the 20th day of December. And this is in our Methodist church. And I attended this Methodist church with the Disney family. And that's Victoria, and that's me. And this is our Methodist church. And I ran the music there as an ASCAP BMI publisher. And the music, I would publish Disney's music and put it on the radio every weekend at Kinzer Park, General Kinzer's Park, and in this Methodist hospital where the Disney family went to church with I and James Taylor and Hayden Scott and people like this. Now, when Victoria was dismembered and murdered, they didn't even, none of the people in this church even helped. Nobody cared that there wasn't an obituary. A woman from another Methodist parish did a little service for her on a side altar on a Wednesday. Other than that, no obituary about her murder in the paper. And nobody in this church and everybody in this church would come up and hug her after I carried her in. And she couldn't walk or talk because of her muscular dystrophy. But they all loved her. They'd all come up and hug her after I carried her into this church for 7, 8 years. They all loved her, but none of them ever come over to her home and asked her how she was doing. I even had cancer and had to go to other cities and get cancer operations and leave her at home with food I prepared for her days ahead of time. And nobody who loved her in this church ever stopped by, talked to her, or did anything to help this woman. While I was in the hospital with cancer, getting operated on for cancer, nobody cared about her. And I was her sole support for over 30 years, Greg. And in those 30 years, not one person from any church I attended or ran the music at, not a single person ever stopped in and said, "How are you doing today, Vicki?"
Yeah. Offer to help take.
When I carried her into any church,
Mhm.
they all gathered around her, hugged her and loved her. And it was all about looking good.
Right.
And making
Usually
money
is.
and making money for their businesses.
Right.
It was never about, they really cared about that woman because none of them ever did. And none of them still do.
So you even had to carry her to the bathroom and nobody'd even come to, offer help or even help to get her in the door at the church.
Nobody ever helped that woman in any way, shape, or form. And she couldn't
Unreal.
walk. She couldn't walk the day I married her.
Right.
It's just unbelievable. And she was, there's so much, this is going to take a long time. But here's Victoria when she was young. And she was a real pretty girl at 15. And then here, this is her on the Bobolo boats. She was the poster girl for Jerry Lewis. She and her brother, who both had MD, were the poster kids for Jerry Lewis. And when she was murdered, I called Jan Brewer in Arizona and Jerry Lewis. And I told them that their poster girl for MD had been murdered, didn't even return my calls.
That's unreal. They'll make money off of somebody for however long they used her. Man, they don't even care enough to, wow.
They made in one show, they made $23 million off of her and her brother,
Unbelievable.
using them as the MD poster kids.
That's unreal.
They were murdered and nobody even came. Nobody cared.
Well, tells you a lot about Jerry Lewis.
He's dead now.
Yeah.
And here's another picture of Terry. And I don't know, can you see that?
Yeah, it's a little blurry, but I can
Terry
see it.
Heath. She even looks like Sarah Heath Palin. She's the
She does.
Heath family. And not even an obituary. This girl was hung in her dog's leash and they called it suicide. And we were supposed to be married 3 days later. And she had made love to me for 15 hours just before being murdered. And they called it a suicide. She was being stalked by off-duty policemen.
Yeah.
And to go back and set some of this up, what is this, Greg?
This is the back of your baby picture.
What year?
That would be 1953.
Yeah. And it's taken by who? George Towers.
Yeah, isn't that an interesting name?
On the Rogue River, Detroit. Rogue Detroit, the Rogue Street. But I live on the Rogue River now. And then look at the 4-4. That was the age I would be kidnapped at with my twin. So 2 4-year-olds were kidnapped. One of us was murdered.
And I point out that 1963 there at the left too. That's when
The year
Kennedy was killed, the 35th
murdered.
president.
That's right. The year Kennedy was murdered. And when I was 5, I escaped the people who kidnapped me.
George, like George Bush and the Twin
And
Towers.
Rogue River is where Cooper supposedly jumped out of a plane he hijacked and demanded a couple $100,000. And who was Cooper in my life?
Well, the real DB Cooper, not the fake one, was the one that kidnapped your kid.
Yeah. And the real Cooper went to high school with me and died in a car crash. He was driving on Mound Road in front of Gene Hamilton Chevrolet, and he hit a telephone pole going over 100 miles an hour, and he was killed instantly. That's the real DB Cooper. He went to school with me. And then another DB Cooper kidnapped my daughter off of her school bus when she was 7. And then the FBI created a fake FBI name for a guy who hijacked a plane on the Rogue River.
And this is interesting, Hugh, about that 44.
As my
on there.
daughter was kidnapped and Judge Hunter B. Stair was murdered.
Right. Even before I met you, I had an accumulation of news stories that had 53 and 44 in it and 35 in it before I even met you, because I kept seeing these numbers in the news all the time and I kept wondering, what the heck does this mean?
And then here, on the day Victoria was murdered, here's Obama laughing with a shirt that has 4-4 on it. As on the day my wife's throat was slit and she was dismembered.
Yeah.
And remember, this is after they murdered Terry Heath in a dog's leash. We called it suicide. And no suicide occurred in Terry Heath because I came across her, gave her CPR, got her breathing again, and she was murdered a second time, 35 days later. And here's Obama,
right?
Obama laughing about it, right at the White House. And now his vice president is president of the United States. And what's he doing with my family names this time?
Well, you put Kamala Harris up there.
And I'm the Harris family.
Yeah.
And then I'm a Supreme Court justice named Fuller. And I'm also this family. That's
And
that's my great 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 grandfather.
the nose is that's your nose. I mean, you know, you can tell
That's
that
my
you're related.
family, Greg. That's I'm
Yeah.
directly related to him.
When you had hair, your hair even kind of
And
looked
then
like that.
you'll be writing about witches in the colonies. In the book you're writing about my history. And he went to the Bell Witch House in Tennessee, that president.
Right.
I mean, this is history. There's no lie in this. This is part of history. Okay, so, and Biden just appointed a Black woman with my ancestor's name after appointing a Black woman vice president with my family's last name, after they murdered 4 of my wives. And we've only talked about 2 murdered wives here, Terry
Right.
Heath and Victoria Mellon. Prior to Terry Heath, Kiki Kissel was murdered in Detroit in 1991 on Christmas Day. And her daughter was also murdered as I sat in L. Brooks Patterson's office trying to make out a report about the Oakland County child killers, the real ones that they've never solved the murders for. As I sat in L. Brooks Patterson's Oakland County office, they murdered Kiki's daughter, Serena. And I think this was me and Kiki in 1990. That's Kiki, that's me. And I have one photo of her daughter who was murdered. Here. And her daughter that was murdered is the girl on the left. And it's a very bad picture, but there I am with Kiki and her two kids, Shannon and Serena. And then there's Tammy and Huey. And me and Karen. This girl was murdered as I sat in L. Brooks Patterson's office.
About 5 years ago.
Yes. With this kid who is my brother-in-law's son, Tony Jr., and his father, my brother-in-law, was a DI at Fort Knox during the Vietnam War. That's my brother-in-law. That was my wife, Nancy. Nancy had her leg removed, and then she was murdered on the day they let the Bundys out of jail. She was my 4th wife to be murdered. And I had divorced Tony's sister back in 1970. And they came back and dismembered her and murdered her too on the day they let the Bundys out of jail under President Trump. And this guy helped run Fort Knox. And his best friend ran Camp Lejeune,
right.
The Schofield Bible, Schofield. Right. They murdered my nephew here, Tony Jr. His father ran Fort Knox during the Vietnam War. My cousin piloted the Enterprise during the Vietnam War. And none of this is coincidence. Admiral Byrd is one of my family members. He was in charge of the Pacific Fleet in World War II. Then my cousin piloted the Enterprise. My brother ran Fort Knox during Vietnam. I come from a family that's always been military, and I'm related to many presidents. And via Admiral Byrd, I'm related to all the kings of Europe. And that brings us to pictures like This is my family at their property, Mount Rushmore. See, I have more pictures of the Indians' land that was his. His right there is part of my family now. I'm related to the presidents on Mount Rushmore, and there's no lie in this. And I live with the family who owns the land. But I'm never interviewed, and my truth is never told, and my wives are dismembered and murdered along with my children, and it's never in the news. And you're writing my story, and now someone stole the book via the US mail. And then we have things like, what is this? Can you read that, Greg?
This is Hoffa's wife, Jimmy Hoffa's wife,
Oh, and who is she?
Virginia Sue Harris.
Oh, my family.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And remember, we put up videos, and I've always posted about how the FBI detained me for Jimmy Hoffa's murder.
Yeah.
Several hours after he disappeared, while with my mother-in-law at the Bacchus Fly Fox. And I'm not in any book. I'm not in any movie. Total blackout on my life. As kids are murdered and thrown on my properties for decades. My wives are murdered, and it's called dismembered bodies are called natural causes and suicide. And not one, not two, not three, not four. 5 times my family has been murdered since 1953 when I was born. 5 times, Greg. And then here I am. I'm related to Jimmy Hoffa. But I don't exist, and nobody will interview me. And then what did I and the woman tell you that George Knapp, he lies to us. As he writes a book about Jimmy Hoffa, he can't write about me. He can't write about my murdered, dismembered wives because we don't live in Las Vegas. Yet he can write about and lie about my family member, James Hoffa.
Right.
And I'm not allowed 5 seconds on Coast to Coast. And I worked for the real owners of Premier Network before Art Bell existed.
Yeah, it was a bowling alley originally, wasn't it?
Yeah, Premier Networks was a bowling alley. It was Premier Lanes across the street from my college, as President Ronald Reagan and the Pope visited my college.
Yeah, right across the street from
And they
Premier.
were
Isn't that
both
amazing?
shot. And when they were shot, you got Nick Pope in the news.
And now he's on Coast to Coast, and yeah.
But I'm not allowed. And they hide me behind UFOs and aliens.
And right after Nick Pope talks to you, like the next day or the day after, he's on.
So
Fox
now
News.
you got my
Unreal.
book finished. You got my book finished. You're sending it back to me so I can repair your computer, read the book, and the post office steals the book. As they hide me and release more alien stories from the CIA and the FBI and hide me behind S4. And remember, I was kidnapped at 4 in Area 51.
Right.
And my
Squire
cousin, the Snyder family, my cousins, built Area 51. They hide me by blowing up the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, Building 7 in New York, and then handing the world aliens from S4 with Bob Lazar as they murder the girl who Ronald Reagan held up as the role model for CPS and Head Start on the Manning Ranch, and Manning co-created the JFK archives. But I don't exist and my story doesn't matter.
Yeah, and this is why I called you the biggest rabbit hole on earth in chapter 11 of my first book. And then someone ordered my book this week, and even Amazon is apparently being infiltrated because he gets the book and all the words are backwards and upside down and in a different font than what we put it in there. And he said he couldn't even read it. It's unbelievable what they're doing.
So they won't allow my truth to go out. And you know, everything I say, I have real records that prove it. Like I owned Fox News before cable TV existed. Here's the Harry Fox Agency, 42nd Street, New York, New York. Tommy Valindo, to me, Huey Squire, bottom line. Can you read this, Greg?
I see it.
This is 1985, before Fox News existed, before Fox Entertainment existed. This is Fox Entertainment, New York. I'm the publisher, bottom line, of Stephen Sondheim, who just died 2 months ago. And I own this contract worth $88 million from the Harry Fox Agency, and Tommy Valindo was Fox Entertainment in New York before internet and computers existed.
Yeah, before Rupert Murdoch was involved. And that song, Send in the Clowns, that was in the Joker movie.
Yep, not coincidence. They make fun of me right out in the open and they never say I exist.
Right.
And this was an $88 million contract with Stephen Sondheim. It was one of 28,000 multi-million dollar contracts I owned as bottom line at ASCAP and BMI. We collected the royalties and gave the royalties to the artists. And on 9/11, all of my records were destroyed in the Twin Towers. And my name was stolen 20 years prior to that, Huey Squire. And you can clearly see to Huey Squire, bottom line, New York. I mean, there's no denying this. I have real records to prove everything I say. Here's the Bay of Pigs. What do we see on the Bay of Pigs boat, Greg?
Yeah, there's your
This is just
initials.
before they murdered Kennedy. My initials, Huey Squire. Skull and Bones. Oh, my family built the college. Skull and Bones is in. This was the cover of my family's magazine. Harris Publishing owned 267 worldwide magazines. We would put people like Ronald Reagan and the Pope and the Kennedys on the covers of our worldwide magazines. Life, Look, Business Week. Our competition was Patty Hearst. Patty is my sister. That's my sister, Patty. An Irish name, just like my cousin Kennedy. That was the Bay of Pigs. When they murdered my wife, here's how they hid her in Greenville. They had Phil Robertson come in, and this is the Greenville News. And this is March 11th, 2013. After my wife and my lawyer are murdered, he takes over the newspaper for Alex Jones, the Greenville Sun. But they don't mention the murders of my wives right down the street.
Right.
And they preach to the world with this duck commander. Well, gee, the duck commander, Mr. Peterson at my high school, he shot his own kid in the back of the head instead of a duck. Killed him instantly.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Killed him instantly. And then this guy come into town after the Perrys and the National Guard on the day they murdered my wife. Perry is my only living wife. That's her family. And her friends and family murdered 4 of my wives for the White House. Bikers. After I stopped their illegal gun and drug trade in Michigan. And you know all this, Greg.
Yeah, I was like around 78, 79, right?
And then, you know, I own this, I don't have a picture of it here, but I was made a partner in Smoky Mountain Ministries owned by Cook. And a partner is 50-50. So I was taking in $7,000 a week and I never got a paycheck from my partner. And this is right after they murdered my wife and my attorney, 3 of my wives, 2 of my attorneys, and a judge. He makes me a partner in his ministry, Smoky Mountain Ministries, Cook. And gee, once again, Cook is my second wife's family.
Mm-hmm. Apple
Along
Computers
with
family.
Perry, Cook and Perry. Oh, and gee, Cook and Perry are Apple Computer. And I'm Gardner, and Gardner is Bill Gates' mother. And that second wife who's still alive, whose family has murdered my next 4 wives, 4, their family members didn't give me a paycheck, so I couldn't hire a lawyer to replace the one they murdered. And all of this is being covered up. And here I am in New York at the New York Marriott Marquis. Look at Huey F. Squire Jr. New York Marriott Marquis.
Yeah.
New York, New York. A publisher's meeting. So I'm meeting with Stanley Mills, Bebe Bourne, Elvis Presley's publisher. You see the date on here, Greg? 1987.
Yeah.
And this is pre 9/11 when they stole my bottom line trademark, my name, Huey Squire. And they stole it worldwide, $2 trillion in theft. And then they made up a story about Middle East people blowing up the towers after Americans blew up the towers to hide the theft of bottom line New York.
With airplanes, Hugh, in that same year, 1987, they tried to kill you on an airplane in
Right.
Michigan.
In Michigan.
Yeah, in August.
Yeah.
On the anniversary of 10-year anniversary of Elvis's murder, who died on a toilet, and you were chained to a toilet.
And all of this took place on this Manning Ranch, and Manning co-created the JFK archives. So they've stolen my trademark, my name, murdered my family 5 times, arrested me for Jimmy Hoffa's murder. Tim McVeigh was my next door neighbor in Michigan. I stopped an illegal gun and drug trade known as Fast and Furious. They chased Noriega into the Pope's sanctuary years later.
Right.
And they murdered kids by the dozens and thrown them on my property since 1953. Some of them related to presidents. And then they set me up on this Civil War ranch and murder my wives. And then they call it suicide and natural causes as they're dismembered and murdered. And Greg, my wives were sodomized in the hospital, remember?
Yeah, even had their ears cut off. It's unreal.
And I
With
have
a hole
proof of
punch.
that. I have the hospital records, Greg.
Right. It says just plain as day what they did, the results of what happened to her. Yeah. There's no getting around it.
And in New York at the meeting in 87, nobody even knew Dee Snider. You recognize Dee Snider?
Well, I wouldn't, but I know some people will.
Well, there's Dee Snider, Twisted Sister. He was at my publisher's meeting. Now, remember, I'm a publisher and he's an artist.
Mm-hmm.
So I represent the artists. I collect the royalties and give them a paycheck.
Right.
Nobody even knew of him in 1987. He didn't exist yet. And then who did he take? He took Alice Cooper's place on national radio. And who was Cooper? Cooper was the family that kidnapped my wife. And to show
Yep.
people, this is the street leading to my ranch. My ranch is around that next bend, and there's a stream that goes across it, and then you come to my house on the left. This is where I lived. So you can see how secluded it is. They give me this ranch in the middle of nowhere, and then they start murdering my family. And then they laugh about it on TV. You had, my wife was Victoria. You had Aliens, V. Remember that TV series?
Yeah.
V.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Remember Dr. House from London? He went back to London. He started a group, a jazz group called the Copper Bottom Band after they murdered my wife. His last 2 TV series showed how they murdered my wife. Then he left, went back to London and started the Copper Bottom Band. Oh, in Michigan, where I and my wife are from, we have copper mines, and I'm the bottom line. And you know all this, Greg. And there's even more. Here's Terry. Now, Terry created the Head Start program for Ronald Reagan, and she's at Bottom Line in New York, across the street from the Twin Towers, the day before the Twin Towers were blown up. And look at the sign, designed by Michael Graves. And she's right at Bottom Line in New York. Her son, Jason, wanted to work for me as a graphic artist. He wrote me a letter and asked if he could work for Bottom Line. He was dead 5 minutes later the next day.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, the next day. And there's Terry and Dana across the street from Bottom Line and the Twin Towers. At Michael Graves. And who was Michael in my life, Greg?
It's your brother?
And what did he do?
He raped Kiki.
Yeah, he raped my fiance a week before our marriage in front of our children while I worked.
Right.
At Premier Networks. The same coast to coast that hides me behind aliens and won't say my truth of Hoffa or Kennedy or my wife's murders, or the fact that I was arrested for Hoffa's murder. They won't mention any of that as they write fake books and movies. What is this, Greg?
That is that's either a grade card or attendance form for a school, and there's some pretty famous names there.
Elon Musk, right?
Yeah, Musk, Keith Olbermann there, or somebody Olbermann.
Yeah, and Harris.
Lori Lightfoot from Canada.
And I'm the Harris
Ernie
family.
from Chicago.
And I lived on an Indian reservation with Lightfoot.
Yeah.
After I escaped the 5 governors that kidnapped me, a chief put me on an Indian reservation with Gordon Lightfoot. The 2 people that cut my father's hands off as Admiral Byrd was murdered in 1957, and I was kidnapped on the same day with my twin. Those same people were merchant marines on the Edmund Fitzgerald. And there you have Harris, Lightfoot, and Musk. Right in a row. And I and Field, you see up here, Field? I and Field delivered barrels of dead meat into New Jersey under the bridge from New Haven, Michigan. That's W.C. Fields' family. My family made W.C. Fields and Charlie Chaplin famous because we owned the largest video distribution company on earth in New York back in the 1900s, Silent Films. Schwartz Video, that's my family.
Yeah.
Here's Green. I went to school with Green. I'm Harris. Here's Honey. And gee, Honey was a waitress friend of mine at Jimmy the Greek's restaurant. Here's Lightfoot. Here's Elon Musk. Here's Overman. You starting to get the picture? I'm the most covered up person on the face of this earth. And I was working for GM, Ford, and Chrysler, designing with people like, who gave you the Gullwing car?
Say it again. I didn't hear you.
Who gave you the Gullwing car, Greg?
I don't know what you're talking about. The Go Wing
Back
card?
to the Future.
Oh, you're talking about DeLorean.
Yeah. I designed
Gullwing.
cars.
Okay. Yeah.
I designed cars with people like DeLorean at General Motors
Right.
Tech Center, which was across the street from my house on Bebe Street. In the village of Warren, as you got Freddie Mercury, I wrote a song called, where is it?
You designed a part of the assembly lines at the Chrysler where DeLorean worked, and Judith Fari Baker's dad worked too, I
I
believe.
designed the Dodge Shadow assembly line. I built
Yeah.
it in the warehouse on 8 Mile and Outer Drive.
Hmm.
And then we put it up in Tennessee. I wrote this song prior to that. Look at 1987.
Yeah.
Bottom line advertising and publishing. The Shadows. And then the world got Dodge Shadows from my neighbor, John DeLorean.
Right.
As Kennedy's press secretary, Fletcher Nebel, used my trademark bottom line in his last book with a red line under it. And that was Obama's red line in the sand as he murdered my wives.
Right.
So there's the song I wrote. I even published it and copyrighted it. And then the world got the Dodge Shadow. And then
And
here I
Time
am.
Magazine said bottom line busted.
Oh,
with DeLorean's picture on it.
Who's this, Greg?
Arlen Specter.
United States Senate. Look at 87, September 30th, before 9/11. This is just after I stopped the illegal gun and drug trade run by the Senate. I was active in the US Senate with the Kennedy family over the Bourne Convention. You can see it's right to me, Mr. Huey Squire Company. And this was about the Bourne Convention.
Right.
In the Bourne Convention, that's what this was about. Our yearly meeting, publishers meeting at ASCAP BMI New York. All the publishers met there for the Bourne Convention, International Convention, revising the Bourne Convention for protection of literary and artistic works. I was suing the airlines and the cable companies because they weren't giving people like Bob Seger and Ted Nugent a royalty check and using the works that they created on airlines and cable TV and never paying us a paycheck. So I was active in sessions of Congress forcing airlines and cable TV to pay billions of dollars in royalties to people like Bob Seger and Ted Nugent.
Yeah, they actually passed it. It was, I can't remember, it was either 89, 90, 91, somewhere around there they passed it.
Ted Kennedy helped me pass it.
And had
Bob Kennedy and John Fitzgerald Kennedy were helping me before they were murdered.
Those were the letters you were writing to President Kennedy when you were like 10 years old, all the way back in 62, 63.
Yeah, that's right.
You'd been working on that long.
I was already a composer member at BMI and ASCAP. My family wrote the songs Elvis Presley was singing in his movies and in Vegas. There's no lie in any of this. Here's my family member. Or can you read the name at the bottom of the note, Greg?
Yeah, it's Bird.
This is a week before they murdered Victoria on Halloween Eve. Victoria is still alive. I saved her life 20 days earlier. Put her in this hospital. I asked to move her when I realized they were murdering her there again, and they wouldn't let me move her. So they kept her in this hospital. The Bird family, my cousin, visited her, left me this note, and this was just before Halloween Eve when they slit her throat. And it was the day before they cut her ears off. It was 5 days after they sodomized her. She was knocked out and sodomized right in the hospital. And I have the hospital records. And when I confronted the security about her being sodomized, they lied to me and told me she wasn't. When I asked them where her ears were, they didn't know. I asked them what caused it, and they told me pressure. When was the last time you laid on your ear and it fell off, Greg?
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
And here, after they sodomized Victoria, you have this, Greg. This is and Victoria's hospital. And these are transfusions they had to give her because when they sodomized her, they cut her lower rectum. And she had to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 transfusions in the next day because they cut open her lower intestine and she was bleeding from her rectum. And you know what's funny about this, Greg?
Doesn't feel very funny, but go ahead.
I and my wife never had sex. You know why?
Well, I know that you married her to help her with her meds and
yeah, and she had muscular dystrophy.
Right.
She was a dwarf.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I'm 6'3" and weigh 200 pounds. My wife was
she's in a wheelchair.
4'9" in a wheelchair. I never had sex with her.
Right.
And they tried to blame this on me. And she'd already been in the hospital for over a week, for 10 days, when she was sodomized. And she was sodomized after they knocked her out and gave her a minor operation. 2 male nurses sodomized her right there in her bed as she was knocked out. And then she had to get all these transfusions. And I even have a doctor saying that she was raped. And they wrote natural causes on this little girl's death certificate, Greg. And you're aware of this. And there it is. These are transfusions of blood, pints of blood given to a girl sodomized who'd never even had natural sex with her real husband. And I was taking care of her for 30 years.
Right. Yeah. Even when you were married to others, you were helping her out and stuff with her wheelchair and her condition because you knew her family. And yeah.
I took care of her and her entire family for 30 years. They all had muscular dystrophy.
Right.
I played music and I was a publisher and I had a computer business. When they slit Victoria's throat Halloween Eve and called me on the phone and screamed Slater into my ear on her advocate's phone, right in her bedroom at the hospital as they murdered her. They used her hospital advocate's phone to scream Slater. Slater is a politician in Troy, Michigan, where my second still living wife lives. Slater Ree is Attorney General of Tennessee. This is not coincidence what they did to my wives. And they made fun of me. Every step of the way, police called me, turned blind eyes to murders, used fake names and badge numbers. Then they murdered the attorneys and judges, and they've gotten away with these murders of kids and women all my life. They're still getting away with it now. And then here, this is my stolen trademark. You recognize this, Greg?
Sure do.
This is a California bar, California government, law, practice, management, and technology publication. The bottom line tables of contents. Bottom line is my stolen trademark. They stole it right out of the Library of Congress via Weiner and Associates. Weiner and Associates was Clinton and Obama's friends. If people remember, Weiner was exposing himself to little girls online and went to jail. Weiner was in charge of my trademark, Bottom Line. Weiner and Associates, in front of Dire Straits' house, Mark Knopfler's house on Telegraph Road in Southfield, where James Hoffa, my family member, disappeared from. As my Bottom Line trademark and my name were stolen worldwide, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared too, and the FBI arrested me for his murder, for his disappearance. They tried to tell me I murdered Jimmy Hoffa the following day. And he's my own family member. And I'm not in any book, any newscast, and they just stole the book you wrote about me. And they stole 20 years of my online documentation of these things. Gee, aren't they going to look stupid when they realize I have copies of everything they just destroyed?
Yeah.
The government just destroyed your book, destroyed my life again, stole my income, stole 20 years of real history right off the internet. And I'm going to put it all back up again in
Yeah.
movies like this.
Yeah.
This is the real thing. This is LPMT, California Bar, California government. For over 60 years, they have used my stolen trademark, and every lawyer on earth has studied out of my stolen trademark to pass the bar exam. Every Supreme Court justice studied out of my stolen trademark, and they knew it.
Yeah, and this is in California specifically. That's Kamala Harris and her husband.
Yeah, and they're entertainment lawyers, Greg.
Right.
And I'm an ASCAP BMI publisher who made airlines and cable TV pay billions of dollars to artists they weren't paying.
Right.
So they paid me back, stole my trademark, stole my name, murdered my wives, murdered my kids. And they're still doing it, Greg. This is some country we live in, huh? And now they're stealing the Harris name and the Jackson name. I have a Supreme Court justice in my family. His name is Supreme Court Justice Fuller.
Yeah.
My family, the Fuller family, put a transmission in every semi on earth. Oh, gee, and Jimmy Hoffa was married to my family member. Surprise anyone? Gee, I wonder why he was married to her.
Right.
Here's my family member, Frank Sinatra, at ASCAP BMI New York at my publishers meeting, right? See Frank Sinatra?
Which one's Frank Sinatra, Hugh? I don't know.
Right in the middle.
Okay. That's not the Frank Sinatra people think of. They think of as younger.
Okay. Oh, well, that's him as an old man after Nancy was about 30.
Right.
You see him at ASCAP New York? I'm a publisher there. That means I was his publisher. Oh, and they stole the entertainment contracts from me. So all the lawyers could study out of it to pass the bar exam. And
Congress interviewed him about Kennedy's murder too.
Oh, well, look at, here's Kennedy at an ASCAP meeting with me in New York.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Oh, gee, he was helping me with the Bourne Convention.
Wow.
As the entire lawyers bar of California stole my trademark and studied out of it to pass the bar exam, Greg. And people like Scalia did this. And now they're stealing my family names, Harris, Jackson. Interesting who Americans really are, isn't it?
It's really interesting to see
See,
how this whole
see
system
how
works.
Kennedy was
Yeah.
really working with me at the Berne Convention, Greg?
I see. This is your photo too, isn't it?
Yeah,
Photo you took, right?
yeah. Here's Morton Gould. Oh, is that Estelle Harris of Toy Story? And who's the guy next to her? Oh,
No
that's
clue.
Morton Gould. Oh, he made me a publisher in Foley Federal Court. He ran ASCAP and BMI in New York.
Right. That's why they beheaded Foley.
He created a new genre of music, just like I did. That's why he made me a publisher. He says, gee, your music's really good. This is an entirely new genre. And then they stole my trademark and name.
Wow.
That's what he said about my song, The Shadows, and my song, John John, as they murdered John Kennedy. See the history of me they're hiding, Greg?
Right. Yeah, I do.
Oh, Estelle Harris. Who was she? Oh, she was, my family. And she was in Toy Story. Oh, there's Woody on the Manning Ranch. Woody's Toy Story.
And Seinfeld. Yeah. Tell if you want to, you can that was in the notes we had. If you want to go back and talk more about Woody and the Manning Ranch and Toy Story.
Oh, well, Buzz, my uncle Flayton at NASA put Buzz on the moon, and you have Buzz in Toy Story too.
Right.
And there were 4 Toy Stories, just like I was kidnapped at 4. Oh, Estelle Harris, she was married to George. As I bought George a Corvette and he moved off to California, and George Little became head of the Pentagon, where they blew up my Civil War case, my civil rights case.
Yeah.
On 9/11.
Chicken Little, the sky is falling.
Yeah.
I get that now.
And another Rich Little was a comedian. And my cousin Robin Williams was a comedian. And gee, the history goes on in my life, doesn't it, Greg? And then here, who do we have here? We have Trump and his wife with Epstein. And Maxwell, G.H. is Lane. Gee, that's her name, George. G, like George Little, H, like Huey, G.H. is Lane. With Epstein. And gee, I was a teacher at 14 in Warren, Michigan, with Garrison and Manning. At 14, I was teaching college electronics to the Abrams tank plant, and the world got welcome back Cotter. And the principal was always screaming Epstein. And Trump was always borrowing $5 billion at a time from my family's banks and never paying a penny back as he hung out with Epstein. And G.H. is Lane. Maxwell. Oh, gee, who was Maxwell? Max Headroom? Janet Bauman, Janet Barclay's father in Texas? Max Headroom? Oh, gee, I don't know nothing at all about this. And gee, remember, Michael Jackson's family gave me a key to Epstein's house in the Virgin Islands when Tina Turner's husband was changing the tires on my semis. Remember this, Greg?
I forgot about Tina Turner's husband part.
Oh, yeah. Ike Turner. He was a mechanic at Whitmore Lake, Michigan, just for me. Yeah. And that's where you got White Boy Rick from, too. The lie of White Boy Rick and the lie of Bucky Larson, Born to Be a Star. The drug dealers I stopped, they all got Hollywood movies. I don't exist.
Oh, they put Bucky Larson in
Yeah, he was born to
Avengers.
be a star, and all he is a drug dealer selling illegal guns and drugs to Mexicans for
Yeah,
Hank Bouguet. And I'm
right.
naming names. And any one of them can come and sue me. I look forward to going to court. Come on, break open my can of worms. So Trump, he let the Bundys out of jail on the day they murdered my wife, Nancy. And I divorced Nancy in 1970. They murdered her on that day. And
Yeah,
now,
she'd been married to Lavoie,
and
right?
now the Bundys tried to get me to get all the Patriots to come here after my third wife was murdered. They wanted me to show everybody a video about a shotgun this big when it can only be this big, and get
Right.
all the Patriots from Tennessee all the way to the West Coast to come out to Malheur, where I live right now. And I told them, no, this is the same MO you used on Mr. Harris when you killed the little 11-year-old boy you were selling the gay bars at Ruby Ridge. I already knew
Right.
this.
And you were onto them like that.
Yeah, and the FBI's behind things like that
Yeah.
with Valentino, and they make heroes out of Elbrooks, Patterson, and Valentino, who hide the real killers of the kids in Oakland County.
Yeah. Pedophiles.
And
Yeah.
they tried to use me to do the same thing all over again. When I refused, they murdered my wife, Nancy, as they let the Bundys out of jail.
Right.
Her
And
name was-
Lavoie, and
her
they murdered
name-
Lavoie Finnegan.
Her name was
Right.
Mrs. Lavoie. Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And her husband's, I hear he's been a drunk all her life. That's what she always told me. She stalked me for 40 years, kept asking me to come back, and I kept telling her no. And she told me she wanted to get away from Jeff Lavoie because he was a drunk. And I already knew she was. It's
There's no big,
and I divorced Nancy because, can you hear me, Greg? I can't hear you. Say something.
yeah. I can hear you
Okay.
just fine.
I divorced Nancy because she stabbed me in the back
Right.
with a butcher knife and threw me down 2 flights of stairs as she stabbed me. And I had caught her with a police detective having sex with him in front of my newborn daughter a year prior to that. I didn't divorce her for having sex with a detective who was supposed to be protecting me. I guess he thought having sex with my wife was protecting me. And I was 16 at the time. She had raped me. She was 21. I was 16. I married her because she told me she got pregnant by me. And then she stabbed me in the back a year later with a
Yeah,
butcher,
literally. Yeah.
with a butcher knife. So I divorced her I didn't divorce her for having sex with the detective who was supposed to protect me. I divorced her because she tried to kill me.
Right.
All right, now, and there's a related story to that. And that was this man whose son was murdered when I sat in Elbrooks Patterson's office, my brother-in-law, Tony. And Tony was my brother's captain in Vietnam, where my brother lost his legs by hitting a landmine while using an earth mover to build an airport road. Tony came to my house and informed my mother and father that their son hit a landmine. And his sister tried to murder me about 4 years later. I divorced her. Didn't put her in jail. Didn't take her kids. I gave her a house and a car, and I walked away in my tennis shoes. That was this man who ran Fort Knox. It was his sister. Their father was Joe Jacobs of IBM. Joe Jacobs gave my cousin the software to make the first Microsoft computer at my wedding to his sister, Nancy, in 1965. And nobody on earth knows this. And Bill Gates is my cousin. His mother is Gardner. I'm the Gardner family. And this is what the government's hiding to me. Every time they steal my life and destroy my history online, they're hiding all of this from everyone. Their father was also mayor of East Detroit when Ted Nugent and Alice Cooper got their start from East Detroit. I was a publisher. at ASCAP, BMI, New York. And then here, this is 1986 to 1995. Agreement between Bottom Line Advertising and Publishing Company and me, Hugh Squire, American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, New York, New York. I'm a publisher. See, Hugh Squire, Bottom Line Advertising and Publishing. And then here, what do we have? As I signed the Stephen Sondheim contract for $88 million in New York with Tommy Volando, who owned Fox Entertainment, a clown walked up to my cousin in West Palm Beach, Florida, next to Burt Reynolds' house, shot her in the face in front of her kids. A clown. The song I owned the contract to was Send in the Clowns. They murdered my cousin in front of her kids 5 minutes later in a clown suit. And I had 28,000 worldwide entertainment contracts just like that, Greg. And all of them were worth a minimum of $100 million. This was next door to Burt Reynolds' house. I lived next door to Burt Reynolds. I lived down the street from Dolly Parton and next door to her father in Tennessee. Her and Burt Reynolds made movies together. Gee, I'm not an actress. I'm not a singer. I'm the publisher. And I'm the reason they get paid a royalty. And they all deny I exist. You hear any of them talking about me, Greg? Any of them?
Not a bit.
And then right below this, Greg, look at Marlene Warren, 40, who was shot in front of her two teenage sons. She died.
Yeah.
Shot right in the face by a clown. She was expecting a pizza delivery. There's your Pizzagate. And look at drug war. Congressional investigators Sunday urged U.S. funding of Mexican drug patrols to catch heroin and cocaine before it heads north into Michigan, where I stopped it years before. Now they're covering up for themselves after I stopped it.
Mm-hmm.
You understand that? And it's the next story down.
Yeah.
And this was the Detroit News. The Detroit News stole my trademark Bottom Line and used it for their headline on every newspaper. Only you can't find one now because the American Free Press bought them out and they hide all those papers. But anybody who was alive in 1960, they know I'm telling the truth. If they bought the Detroit News.
Right.
And I was a Detroit News kid. I delivered the Detroit News all the way back when I was 5 years old. It was called the Detroit Times. And then it was bought out by Scripps Broadcasting, Graham, and it became the Detroit News. And gee, they stole my trademark with Melky the Clown and DuPont as I worked with the Kennedys to make cable and airlines pay people like Burt Reynolds and Dolly Parton a royalty for using their movies and their songs. But I don't exist. You ever hear Dolly Parton mention me, Greg?
Never.
Burt Reynolds?
Not a bit.
Oh, gee, I'm one of their publishers. I don't matter, do I? I'm expendable, and my wives and all the kids around me, we're all expendable.
Right.
Do you know what kind of outrage there should be in Hollywood? The people who I'm the publisher. I'm the reason they get a royalty and they get a paycheck for the movies they make, and they don't give a shit.
All of them made millions and millions of dollars. Won't even acknowledge.
Yeah, and I don't exist, and I don't matter, and they're all writing books and movies and lies about who killed the Kennedys, who killed Hoffa, what happened at Oklahoma bombing. Timothy McVeigh was my next door neighbor.
thousands of musicians, producers,
John Nichols lived
writers.
next door to me for 30 years. John Nichols ran against Coleman Young to be mayor of Detroit. And they don't even let you know things like this. And I'm the publisher they buried underneath everything. Roseanne Barr, Senator Graham, Senator Arlene Specter, every senator in the country was illegally selling guns and drugs to Mexican cartels. Greg.
Right.
I
Right.
stopped it. Then they turned around. I don't exist. They put me in jail, give Noriega sanctuary, and murder my wives and kids. And I don't exist.
And back to Arlen Specter, he was one of the people that formed the JFK Warren report.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Big lie. Big
Mhm.
lie, hiding my truth. Then here's CBS. Can you read that, Greg?
Sure can. That's Garrett.
Thomas Garrett at CBS. Gee, he destroyed my online computer business as they murdered my wife and my attorney. CBS. Now, CBS covered JFK's murder.
Barbara Walters and Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, and the Walters family asked me to commit arson on their properties in Tennessee. I told them no, then they murdered my wife.
Yeah, they set up the Advocate, which was Walters, and let them use her phone to call you as they.
No, the murderers used Walter's phone to call my house as they murdered two of my wives.
It's unbelievable. And there's
And
CBS working together. Yeah.
There's my receipt from eBay where I had a computer business. And remember, I had the electrical business. I showed you I advertised in the Greenville Sun with Alex Jones.
Yeah. Mhm.
And there's Thomas Garrett destroying my business on the very day my wife was murdered and my attorney was murdered. There he is. And then CBS gave him a raise and put him on a show called The Takeout the next day. This is real history. This is truth. And they don't want anybody to know truth.
Right.
And then speaking of people like Thomas Garrett, who's this guy, Greg?
Wallace.
Oh, who was Wallace in my life?
That's the Wizard of Oz, the scarecrow in your first grade teacher that gave you to the Osborne and the other pedophile boys after school.
To rape me. Oh, he's been a newscaster, a journalist all his life?
Right.
He
related to Governor Wallace.
His family raped me.
Right.
Interesting.
Governor Wallace, Governor Long, Louisiana, Governor Osborne. It's Anderson Cooper.
Oh, well, who was Anderson to me?
That's another one of the rapists with Osborne.
Oh, he raped me in Osborne's basement. Who's Cooper?
D.B. Cooper again.
Oh, yeah. Kidnapped my daughter, raped her. All my grandchildren are named Cooper now. Oh, and where does he work? CNN?
Mm-hmm.
What was my daughter's mother's name? Nancy. Oh, they doubled my wife Nancy too. Her father was Joe Jacobs of IBM. He gave my cousin Bill Gates the software to make the first computer. And they double us? And he's gay? He's married to a man after raping little 4-year-old boys?
Yeah. It's all they hire over there at CNN, just about.
And who's this? Who's this? Fox newscaster?
Tucker,
who's his wife?
Anderson?
Is it Anderson or Andrews?
Yeah, I can't. One or the other. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a family that raped me when I was 4.
Yeah.
Oh, they're all newscasters on all the major media stations. They murder my wives, they cover it up. And then here's bottom line events, Greg. Who's this?
There's Kamala Harris right out of the WWE.
Before she was vice president, right?
Yeah.
Oh, and who's the real Harris family? Me? And oh, gee, they were using my stolen trademark at bottom line events.
I mean, that shows just how much the WWE is involved in this. And of course we talked about that in other videos, but
it's DuPont.
you know,
It's DuPont. And it's the
Yeah.
Americans who stole my trademark, bottom line.
Exactly.
2,500 American corporations stole my trademark, bottom line, and my first and last names,
Right.
all on the same day, Greg.
Yeah.
And it was all organized by the DuPont family. Who died riding DuPont's horse?
Jacqueline Kennedy.
Oh, my cousin.
Hmm.
Oh, they're hiding all of this from all of you.
Yeah.
That I don't exist. My story doesn't matter. Here, Greg, read this. Look at this. A body was found. Look at it. Was found on Tyler Court. And you know, Oscar Tyler Moore. Tyler
Yeah.
Court, Betty Drive was Nancy's mother, Betty. She was married to Joe Jacobs. Here's my wife, Nancy Lane. Here's my
Louise.
mother.
Wow.
Now, here's my mother-in-law with Jimmy Hoffa as he disappears, Louise. Here's Nancy's brother, Charles, who died up at Lapeer at Bob Seeger's house when he was 13. Here's Thomasville, who my wife was married to, and he was murdered with a policeman in Harrisville, Michigan, and I'm Harris.
Wow.
And you know, every day of my life is like this, Greg. There's a murder in my life every day. And I can go all the way over here to Barney.
Utica Street. Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, and here's Rosie O'Donnell. Here's Colton. Here's Clemensville. And Jimmy Hoffa is buried in Clemens. That's where he's, New Haven is Clemensville, Greg.
Okay.
That's where he's really buried. Then here, let's go to 8 Mile and Outer Drive. This is music from and inspired by the motion picture 8 Mile and Outer Drive.
Right where you were born, 8 Mile Road. Yeah.
Yeah, on at Holy Cross Hospital down the street. And I built the Dodge Shadow in a warehouse across the street from here on the other
Right.
side at the Bel Air Theater. For Leon.
Oh, that's his trailer. I just now realized that.
Yeah, well, this is Eminem's trailer. And remember, I bought a house for Mary Miller.
And didn't Weiner buy his trailer or
No.
no?
Eminem lives in the trailer of the detective who was screwing my wife.
Oh, Akers. Okay. Akers
Yeah,
did it.
that's where Akers lived. And you
Wow.
also got
That's unbelievable.
no, there's more to this. You also got Rod Stewart. As I walked in on him, screwing my wife, the next day the world got Rod Stewart at my high school. Then Akers, the detective, died. Eminem buys his house, and they murdered Terry on my birthday, July 4th, as his first album come out from 8 Mile and Outer Drive.
Wow.
Yeah. And 2 off-duty cops kidnapped her out of her CPS office on the Great Lakes. And the police murdered my wife. And they're still turning a blind eye to 4 murders and the murders of dozens and dozens of kids in Oakland County and Macomb County. Remember, all the Duncan kids were murdered on the day John F. Kennedy was murdered. And John F. Kennedy and his brothers were all working with me when they were murdered. John F. Kennedy had just been finished talking to me, a Tribune publisher, in one of his speeches. It's unbelievable what they're hiding in me, Greg, and they're never gonna admit I exist. Eminem, I bought Mary Miller a house. Mary Miller was a civil servant. Her father was a civil servant who named the streets in Oakland County. He named John Fitzgerald Street. He named Hughes Street, where Baker College is. And Mary Miller lived with me in a house on Marion Street in Warren, Michigan, after she was raped by the same people who raped me in Oakland County. She had to stab one of them with a knife to get away.
Yeah.
I felt sorry for her. And I helped her buy a house on Marion Street in Warren, Michigan.
Yeah.
And then the police kicked me out of that house.
Right. Par for the course.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And that was before you got M&M. Then I moved all the way to Tennessee after living in Florida in Key West.
Yeah.
And then the
right.
police kidnapped Terry and then come all the way out to my house in Tennessee and murder Terry. Then 7 years later, they turn a blind eye to Victoria's dismemberment and murder. And now Barr and Garland are turning a blind eye to Joe Jacobs' daughter's murder. And Joe Jacobs gave Bill Gates the software to make the first Microsoft computer. My still living wife is Cook and Perry, Apple Computer. They married me to spy on me.
Yeah.
Then they helped murder my next 4 wives. And they're part of the Oakland County child killers. And I can go on, Greg, I can go on and on like this for months. And none of it's a lie. You've been researching me, right?
Oh, geez.
I went to school with Mullins. You want to see who Mullins is?
Okay.
Now,
I don't know that name.
Remember, Jimmy Hoffa is my family member, right?
Right.
Okay, well, here's Mullins, and Miss Mullins was my girlfriend at Warren High. And Mullins, who has run the union, couldn't be reached for comment, says his attorney, Andrew Quinn. I lived with Quinn. Mullins was my girlfriend, and this is the FBI raids New York City Police Union office. Mullins runs the New York City Police Union, where my trademark was stolen and 9/11 happened. Oh, really think about this. And then remember, my baby pictures were taken on 9/11 by George Towers, and they all have.
Hey, when did you live with Quinn, Hugh? Because when I first met you, there was a guy named Quinn I was making videos with who was telling me not to listen to anything you say. Isn't that amazing?
He lived in Warren, Michigan.
Yeah. And he kept saying he was from one state, and then I look on his profile and stuff, and he has all this stuff from Detroit.
Yeah,
stuff.
well, the Beatles, my card partner introduced the Beatles to my college alumni, Sullivan, David Sinclair. And the Beatles told you when Quinn the Eskimo gets here. And all of that's related to my real truth. I played music all my life. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones marked my life. Remember the Beatles come across?
Mm-hmm.
I am the Eggman. Well, my family is Qualman Eggs in Warren, Michigan. Qualman Eggs was the biggest egg company in Michigan. I ran Acme Cleveland for Russ as Diana Ross stole my trademark bottom line and sang it in the same Vegas casinos Elvis Presley was in. My family was writing Elvis Presley's music. He was singing in his movies.
Yeah, you dated Diana Ross. That's, to me, that's funny.
Well, Ross, I ran Acme Cleveland for Ross.
Yeah.
When I was 19, Greg. And this is when they stole my trademark. And it was stolen by 2,500 corporations.
Right.
And then here's Mullins, my girlfriend. And gee, Mullins runs the New York City Police Union. And did I not tell you the police are a mafia murdering my wives and turning a blind eye to the murders?
Yeah, and it gets more obvious every day, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well,
they sent my car up to Westfall.
What
and they
was
wouldn't
that
fix
all
my
about?
car.
Oh, you mean the guy who stole my band, bottom line, thought he could steal my contracts and my job?
Right. So the police in my car after it's wrecked. Yeah.
And your wife had an accident and they sent it right to Westfall.
And he just sat on it, wouldn't fix it. Sat there for 2
And
months.
my neighbor wrote about me at Kent State, 4 dead in Ohio. That was written right to me. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young were my neighbors when I was kidnapped at 4. They own Lionel Trains next door to my farm where I stopped the illegal gun and drug trade. And the police there in Ohio, they even know it there, huh?
Yeah.
Police
Yeah.
are, the police and the post office, they're a big mafia, Greg.
And that was right up there, right there where Julia Davis lived, and I know the police had something to do with that murder too.
Yeah, I've
That's a whole
already
nother
said
story.
enough in this. Here I am at, can you see who this is?
Yeah, that's you.
This is
Yeah.
me at Ted Nugent's club in East Detroit. I'm Bottom Line Publishing and I'm playing solo. And I'm playing on a guitar Chuck Berry owned, and I
Right.
bought it from Elvis Presley,
Right.
but I don't exist. And I performed like that for over 50 years. I got paid for performing for 50 years in the biggest club.
Yeah, and I mean, you're not making this. I've heard you right there on video playing guitar and keyboard, and I haven't seen you play drums, but I've seen your pictures. But yeah, I can tell you're really good at it. You know.
I don't exist. After performing for 50 years, I knew, I had dinner with Dee Snider before anybody knew Twisted Sister. I was his publisher. I'm unknown. Yeah, you have to ask yourself, why am I unknown after I performed for 50 years in front of millions of people, Greg?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm unknown by design.
Yeah, just like John DeLorean, they did that same thing to him.
Oh, did they?
Oh yeah, they took everything, took all of his money, and put him in a little tiny. You know, he was sitting in a little place like you are after they took everything from him. Yeah.
It's unbelievable, my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then for people who don't know, can you read this, Greg? Can you read this?
Channel 4, America's Thanksgiving Parade. Okay.
Who
Graham
owns it?
Media. Graham
Oh.
Media.
Oh, Senator Graham owns it?
That's right.
Oh, it's in Wikipedia under CC by SA. Oh, so he owns Detroit Media that covered up the fact that kids were being murdered and thrown on my properties.
Yeah.
And he had the fact that governors kidnapped me and my twin, murdered my twin and raped me and tortured me at 4.
We're showing in that in the book how Graham and the Graham Media Company goes back with your relatives back to the early 1800s. It's all going to be chronicled in ways people can't even understand.
And then
yet.
who's this, Greg? My family was writing his music.
Uh-huh.
And there he is with Nixon.
Yeah. No, yeah.
And who took Nixon's place?
That would be Ford. Yeah.
And Ford's my family member.
King and Gardner. Yeah.
Yeah, he's my family member. Oh, so Elvis Presley is shaking hands with Reagan the week before he
Nixon,
gets replaced by my family member. And my family's writing the songs Elvis sings, but I don't exist and I'm not newsworthy.
Yeah.
I'm an ASCAP BMI publisher worldwide. My trademark, my publishing company, my IRS licenses, even my birth name have been stolen worldwide. And I'm not newsworthy anywhere on earth.
Right. Having dinner at ASCAP with Bourne, who's his publisher. Right. Elvis's publisher. Yeah.
Yeah. His publisher would go out with me. She'd wear mink coats, go to dinner with me. And she introduced me to my family member, Stanley Mills. And I lived with, who was that? 50s. Glenn Miller's family, Mary Miller. And you got Eminem. And Eminem lives in a police detective's house who was screwing my first wife in front of my daughter.
Unbelievable.
And he was supposed to be protecting me.
Jeez.
And then here's the guy my family was writing for. And you can see Elvis is all white. This is just before he died.
Yeah.
He's doing the drugs I stopped. And when I stopped the drugs, they killed him on a toilet, just like I was chained to a toilet.
Yeah.
And raped when I was 4. None of this is a lie, Greg. And this is the real history of the country.
And then they tried to kill you on his 10-year anniversary. Yeah.
Right. They do that every year.
Of his death. Yeah.
They do that every year, Greg. And then who's this?
That's Bush Senior and Trump.
Oh, the CIA director and president, whose
Yeah.
son caused 9/11 with the little snot-nosed brat who borrowed $5 billion 5 times from my family's banks and never paid a penny back. He never planned on paying any of it back. And
Right.
then he tells all of you he's rich. He knows
Right.
the system. He knows how to steal money from me.
And then he gets bailed out by Deutsche Bank, and that's German, like Bush.
Berlin, that's Nazi
Yeah.
Germany.
Hmm.
And that's the same place my second wife, who's head of the Indian movement, they meet in Nazi Germany, Berlin. The American Indian movement, that's where they meet. And my second wife, who's still alive, she was the Indian movement's secretary. She's still alive. Why is she alive and my next 4 wives are all murdered?
Yeah, the ones that did it. Right.
Right.
And that's Bush is the Walker family, and you were introduced to actor Clint Walker on the very day that Oswald was
Walked right into Detective Walker in the
Yeah.
basement.
right.
And they omit that from the history books now. They just tell you it was the other policeman and they weren't taking him to Walker.
Right. Yeah.
And then Clint Walker was Walt Disney and I'm Baby Huey. And I went to church with Disney and I published Disney's songs.
Right.
And then there's Estelle Harris, my mother's family, in Toy Story. And she's George Costanza's and there's George Bush
Yeah.
with Donald Trump.
Costanza, that all ties into the Las Vegas shooting too.
And then Barr and Osborne worked for Graham. The people that raped me worked for the senator that covered it all up
Right.
in Detroit News. And those people are the real killers of Kennedy. And George Bush and Donald Trump know it. And who does my wife is murdered? The Tennessee district attorney, the Tennessee state attorney, his name is Slater. His name is screamed to me over the phone on CBS Walters phone, right from my wife's bedroom as they slit her throat. I need to see the US Attorney General. And who does Donald Trump appoint? My next door neighbor, Barr, who's hidden me with Graham since 1957.
CEO of Graham Media's Barr.
And
Yeah.
Kathy O'Brien. And gee,
Attorney General Barr.
my family is Chucky O'Brien. Hoffa raised Chucky O'Brien. Hoffa was married to my mother's family. So my own family covered up my kidnapping and my twins' murder. And George Bush and Donald Trump are helping my mother do it.
Yeah, and you were friends with Dr. O'Brien, right?
Dr. O'Brien, I buried him in Rochester, Michigan. Yeah. Kathy O'Brien and Roseanne Barr, they didn't want nothing to do with them. And they pretend like they were protecting kids because he was this big bad abortionist and they were being used by Hollywood. And that's such a big bullshit story. It's pathetic.
Yeah, right.
They were working for Hollywood hiding me, who was really being used by Hollywood. There's my trademark bottom line used by the entire Hollywood bar to pass the bar exam. This is one great big huge cover up going all the way back to President Lincoln's murder, Greg. And once again, bottom line is my stolen trademark. I hired Weiner and Associates to protect the trademark. Weiner is Clinton and Obama's friend. Weiner was showing his penis online to little underage girls and went to jail instead of protecting my trademark. 2,500 corporations stole my trademark, and the entire California lawyers bar stole my trademark. And your country's being run by a bunch of thieves right now who are stealing my family names, pretending they're history when they're not.
Right.
I'm tired of saying this. I'm gonna just, oh, here, Greg, I missed this one somehow. This
I
is,
don't recognize her.
well, that's Penny Baker. She lived with me in Victoria, and 11 Baker family members, and you know Judith Florey Baker. Well, this is the Baker family. They all lived on the Manning Ranch with me.
Yeah, and she was working on the gay rainbow flag, I think, right? Was it her or one of her
Her
family members?
daughter,
Her daughter. And now they say another guy named Baker made it. But yeah, but it was
Yeah.
that family. Yeah.
And Baker is Gardner's mother, and I'm the Baker family. There's my own cousins. The entire family, 11 Baker family members lived with me just prior to my wife Victoria being dismembered and murdered, and CVS just destroying my income. So I couldn't hire an attorney to replace the one they murdered. That's
I
Penny.
keep finding more and more of these Bakers involved with gay things
That's
all over
Penny
the world.
Baker, and they tried to kill her after they tried to kill Victoria. I've talked to her. I've talked to Penny a couple of times since Victoria's murder.
Okay.
She might be dead now.
Trend setting.
And the Baker family is no longer the
stuff.
Baker family. They have a different name now, and I'm not going to say it.
Sure, well, good.
And they no longer live in Arizona and New Mexico. They live in Texas.
Right.
That's my family. And they lived with me and my wife just before my wife was dismembered and murdered. And this is what they're hiding on the Manning properties, the real killers of JFK. And to further confuse it, CBS gave you Chelsea Manning. Remember this, Greg?
Chelsea. Yeah, I know. That's right. Yeah, we didn't get into the Chelsea Manning. Yeah. Back to the beginning there on the Manning Ranch.
And then here's
the Garrison Manning Archives or the Warren
one
Report.
of my family members, Ava Gardner.
Mm-hmm.
And she was married to Frank Sinatra and Mickey Rooney. And this is my father's family, Bugsy Siegel, who created Vegas.
Yeah. That's where you get Bugs Bunny from, right?
And my life is just full of history like this. Remember the teacher that kept me under her desk as she was naked?
Yeah, there it is.
Shipley. Mm-hmm. She introduced me to Clint Walker, and she had me under. She was my teacher in 5th grade in 1963 as they murdered Oswald and walked him into Ruby's gun. And I was renting the carousel from Jack Ruby. Yeah. Remember all this? Shipley introduced me. She kept me, she wasn't wearing any panties, and she was my teacher, and she kept me under her desk all day. She wanted me to meet her boyfriend. And her boyfriend was Clint Walker, who was playing Daniel Boone for Walt Disney.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to him as Oswald walked past Detective Walker and was shot by Ruby. And I was renting the carousel from Jack Ruby. Well, I don't exist, Greg, and I'm not newsworthy. And then here's the biggest part of New York. This is my bass player, Tony de Blasio. That's his Coney Island. He's got dollar bills plastered all over the walls. He was my bass player at Bottom Line for 50 years. He was born in Brooklyn, New York. He and I played music together for 50 years. He owned Coney Islands and other restaurants and flea markets all over Michigan. After moving there from Brooklyn, New York, on the day he died, he was a decorated Vietnam veteran from the Vietnam War. He had played with me and was my best friend for 50 years. He died. A Russian man took his name and became elected in New York.
Yeah, Mayor de Blasio.
Interesting, huh?
It's unbelievable. Yeah, he had to change his own name to do it too. Isn't
But
that
I don't
interesting?
exist.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, de Blasio's other real name is Warren, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know. I don't
I
even care.
double check, but
I don't even
yeah,
care, Greg.
right.
And you can see this is a photograph on my bass player, Tony, on one of the tables in his restaurant.
And he's who you hired to replace
See the tables in
Westfall,
his
right?
restaurant?
Yeah,
His
yeah.
photo was taken, he put it on the table and he took a photograph of the photograph. See it?
I
Oh,
see.
so
Yeah,
you think he was telling me he was from Brooklyn, New York, and a Russian man was stealing his name?
yeah.
This is a couple days before he died, Greg.
Huh. Smart guy.
He was my best friend. He was the only person who was ever a real friend to me. And then here, Greg, look at, this is my federal tax license.
Yeah,
Look at bottom line, advertising and publishing. I whited out the address in my name so somebody can't copy this, but look at, I left it down here. Huey Squire, see it?
yeah.
Bottom line, advertising and publishing. They even stole my federal tax coupon booklet when they stole my trademark and my federal publishing license prior to blowing up the Twin Towers, Greg. And all of this was my civil rights case in the Pentagon. And they blew my civil rights case up in the Pentagon on 9/11. George Bush and Dick Cheney did that. Lon Chaney was the wolf man. Victoria was murdered Halloween Eve. Her throat was slit. And some of the people who did that, they wrote a song about murdering her called Wolfman in London, 20 years before they murdered her. Remember, I played that song.
Cheney's were publishers too. Yeah, back all the way back in the 1800s. We'll have all that in there.
Unbelievable. This is my
Yeah.
federal tax coupon book for a worldwide publishing company at ASCAP BMI. It was stolen and I'm not newsworthy. It's not in any news, Craig. All my wives murdered, my family murdered 5 times. None of it's in the paper. None of it's on the news. None of it anywhere. And Jimmy Hoffa is my family member. Isn't that interesting? And I'm related all the way back to Thomas Jefferson. He authored the Declaration of Independence. And after murdering my wives and my family 5 times, now they're stealing my family's names with African-American women. And I'm not prejudiced.
No, you dated an awful lot of
just
black
wonder
women
if these
too.
African-American women know why they're being chosen. They're becoming vice presidents, head of ICE.
Right.
Gonzalez is my
Yeah,
cousin
it's the
also.
hide theft. Yeah.
Jackson is a Supreme Court justice, and they're being appointed after Biden and Obama and Trump murdered 4 women and dozens of kids, dismembered, raped, and murdered them, used them in the porno industry and threw them on my properties. I'm Harris, Jackson, and Gonzalez. Biden and Obama murdered my family and turned a blind eye to it 5 times. And I wonder if these black women know how they're being used. And they tell me how hard it was for their ancestors 300 years ago to be slaves.
Yeah.
I didn't do that, and neither did my family. My family was sitting with Lincoln as the actor Booth shot him. She was his guest. Her name was Clara Harris. She was a white woman.
Right.
And you black women are being used to steal my names. And my family freed you. You want to end it there, Greg?
Probably should. Yeah.
I'm going to
Been a long
stop
one.
the share. And here I am at home. And there you are at your work. And I'm going to say bye. And I want you to just put this on YouTube and share the link. Because now we know Facebook will take 20 years of history and just delete it
You're right.
to hide truth.
Sure will.
Bye, Greg.
See you next time.
Have a good one.